Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're playing Doom the Dark Ages on my modern budget gaming PC. This is an i5-12400 and RTX 3050 8GB rig. We tested the 6GB card a while ago. Now as with all the latest modern games, I've been doing this thing recently where I've been testing them at low resolutions using DLSS 4, and today is the turn of Doom. So as you can see, running it on Ultra Nightmare here, that's like the highest preset that the game has to offer. And it feels like I'm using a PC from the Dark Ages. I mean, we're getting at least 30 FPS, but 60 frames per second is pretty much out of the question, at least at native 1080p resolution here. Still, this is actually doing better than I expected, considering we're using what is known as a modern entry-level RTX GPU. It's certainly doing better than the 6GB 3050 we tested the other day, but of course, it's not just the VRAM that's cut down with that card, it also has less cores too. It's essentially a different GPU. So I'm going to play the game for a while with the standard native resolution here, the Ultra Nightmare settings. Of course, we can turn things down a bit if we wish, and we can enable any DLSS preset. Doesn't have to be the extreme ultra performance mode that will turn things down to 360p at this resolution. We'll also actually be turning things down to 720p natively, and then keeping the DLSS preset at ultra performance as well, rendering internally at 240p to see how it looks and performs. But like I was saying, yeah, this preset probably isn't advisable for hardware like this, and we could also implement a more sensible DLSS or upscaling preset if we wanted to, but just for the fun of it, as always, of course, we will be taking things to the extreme. So let's jump into the settings now. We'll switch to DLSS now. I'd recommend probably balanced or quality, perhaps performance at this resolution. I've also enabled the DLSS override to ensure we're using the latest version from within the NVIDIA app here. Now, when enabling ultra performance, we're essentially going to be rendering internally at 360p, and here we are. Now, interestingly, this is actually what it takes to hit plus 60 frames per second with the Ultra Nightmare preset. As I said, you may want to choose a more sensible preset to start with, but if you want to max this game out on an 8GB 3050 and you have a 1080p monitor, then you probably will need ultra performance DLSS mode in order to hit at least 60 FPS most of the time. I've not really gone in depth with the benchmarking today, but you can see that the MSI Afterburn overlay is on the center left of your screen, and I've also enabled the frame rate counter at the top right of the display as well. So now we're hitting over 70 frames per second most of the time. There will still be a few dips and drops towards the low 60s. Now, if we look at the visuals, for 360p, I mean, this is pretty respectable. What you're going to notice in the background is the fencing, or the sort of wiring, whatever you want to call it, around the outside of this level here. You're still going to notice some flickering with that at this low internal resolution, but aside from that, everything else looks pretty crisp and sharp. I haven't actually turned the DLSS sharpness slider up at all. That's actually been left off. Aside from a little bit of flickering here and there on certain objects, honestly, I wouldn't think this was 360p at all. DLSS 4 really is something quite special. Still hitting between 60 and 75 frames per second most of the time. There will still be the occasional dip and drop. Now, for a second there, I thought I just saw a dip below 60 frames per second, and unfortunately, that is not on, so we're going to have to nip that in the bud straight away. Can't be doing with minus 60 frames per second in a fast-paced shooter like this, so we're going to have to go to the next extreme, I'm afraid. And that, of course, does mean implementing DLSS Ultra Performance at 720p. Now, you can actually turn this game down to 720p and a little bit lower. I think it's 1152 by 7 something. And when I was messing around with DLSS earlier, I noticed that it actually dropped our render res to, it wasn't 240p, it was like 221p, but I just stuck to 1280 by 720 to maintain the same aspect ratio. Otherwise it looks a little bit weird on screen. But at the moment we're still looking at 1080p here, DLSS Ultra Performance, but now let's switch to 720p and Ultra Performance mode to see how bad things can look. Is it a more noticeable difference between rendering internally at 360p and 240p? Alright, so let's jump into the settings. We'll switch to 1280 by 720 now as our native res, and we shall keep DLSS at Ultra Performance. So here we have it. This is Doom the Dark Ages rendering internally at 240p on a 3050 and i5-12400F. Now again, it doesn't look that bad at all. If you want to relive a little bit of nostalgia, you know, play Doom how you might have back in the day at a 240p resolution, well, here you go. There is a slightly more sort of higher level of fuzz and blur to everything as opposed to how it looked before at 1080p, especially with the rain effects on screen here. You may notice objects in the distance are slightly softer to look at. There is a little more artifacting around the end of the weapon here as well, especially when moving side to side quite fast. You may notice a little bit of flickering. You can definitely tell that we're not rendering at a native resolution here, but I think that much is obvious. Does it look significantly worse than rendering at 360p on a 1080p monitor? No, to be honest, it does not. Considering this is 3 something by 240p, yeah, honestly, it doesn't look that horrible at all. Again, we have the same artifacts around certain objects like wiring, smaller, thinner objects, and that it's sort of unavoidable. Now, interestingly, we're not gaining that much over 360p that we saw just now in terms of the overall frame rate. Sure, there are moments when it is slightly higher, but we're still going to experience the same dips and drops to the low mid 60s every so often, which isn't too surprising, to be honest. The lower we go in terms of res, the harder the CPU has to work. There's only so much you can do, really. You're not going to get an infinite improvement as we drop the resolution or the DLSS render preset, but yeah, this certainly makes a huge difference over native at 720p and 1080p, that's for sure. Is it worth playing like this? Probably not, but as always, it's certainly fun to see how modern games look when we turn the internal renderers right down. And Doom the Dark Ages looks pretty nice, or in context, it looks pretty nice. You know, if we were running natively at 240 or 360p, it would certainly look a lot worse than this. So thanks to upscaling, it is somewhat acceptable, I think, is the best conclusion to draw here. Does it make a huge difference to the performance? Well, no, perhaps not as much as you may expect either. It's certainly worth implementing one of the more aggressive forms of DLSS with a 3050 at 1080p, though I think performance or balanced may be the best bet, but ultra performance is going to guarantee you over 60 FPS basically almost all of the time, so maybe worth thinking about. But there we are, another game rendered at a very low internal resolution. It looks pretty good overall here, and be sure to leave your thoughts down below as always. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and you want to, of course, leave a like down below if you enjoyed this video or it was helpful. Thanks again, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.